Army of One by Jansen Davies. Chapter 1. The Vision. Grace Waller didn't dream, she saw. It began with a flicker behind her eyes, a static hum in her bones. She was brushing her teeth when the world split open. The mirror fractured, not physically but perceptually, and through it she glimpsed the end. A sky torn by fire, cities reduced to ash, ships the size of mountains blotting out the sun, alien vessels, sleek and brutal, descending like judgment. Humanity screaming beneath them, not in defiance but in confusion. No one knew what they were fighting. No one knew how to fight. Grace dropped the toothbrush. It clattered against the sink, a mundane sound in the face of apocalypse. Then came the timestamp, burned into her mind like a brand. February 14th. 6 months. She staggered back, gasping. Her powers had shown her death before. Car crashes, betrayals, even her own near miss with drowning in the Ganges. But this was different. This wasn't personal. This was planetary. She sat on the edge of her bed, trembling. Her apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt staged, like the world was holding its breath. She whispered aloud, "I'm not enough." It wasn't self-pity, it was math. One Grace Waller, no matter how gifted, couldn't stop an interstellar war. She could move objects with her mind, bend weather, vanish into smoke. But she couldn't be everywhere at once. She couldn't hold back an alien army. Unless... Her mind flicked to the forbidden power, the one she'd buried under caution and fear. Time travel. She'd used it once, years ago, to undo a mistake. It had worked, but it had left scars. Reality didn't like being rewritten. But this wasn't about regret. This was survival. She stood, her resolve crystallizing. If she couldn't be enough, she'd become more. She'd go back, find herself, previous versions of herself, recruit herself. An army of one. Chapter 2. The Plan. Grace had always been a strategist. Even as a child in the convent, she'd learned to read patterns, how the nuns moved, how silence could be weaponized, how to disappear in plain sight. Her powers hadn't made her clever. They just made her dangerous. Now she needed both. She sat cross-legged on the hardwood floor, surrounded by notebooks, maps, and a half-empty bottle of wine. Her fingers trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of calculation. 6 months. That was the countdown. The vision hadn't been metaphorical. It had been precise. She opened a leather-bound journal, the one she'd kept since leaving the convent. Inside were fragments of her life, dates, cities, sketches of strangers she'd met, cryptic notes about powers she'd discovered. It was less a diary and more a breadcrumb trail of a woman trying to outrun herself. She flipped to a page marked 2018, Berlin. A memory surfaced, cold air, graffiti-stained walls, a rooftop where she'd first bent lightning to her will. That version of herself had been volatile, grieving, and newly aware of her ability to manipulate storms. Could she convince that Grace to join her? She turned another page. 2015, Mumbai. The mystic phase. That Grace had been softer, more open, obsessed with the metaphysical. She'd learned to cloud minds there, to walk through fire without burning. Each version of herself was a weapon, but also a risk. Time travel wasn't just about movement, it was about memory. If she pulled her past selves into the present, she risked unraveling her own timeline. She could fracture herself, create paradoxes, lose pieces of who she was. But the alternative was extinction. She stood and walked to the window. Outside, the city pulsed with oblivious life. Cars honked, lovers argued. Somewhere, someone was laughing. They had no idea. She whispered, "I need you." Not to the world, to herself, to the versions of her that had survived heartbreak, hunger, and supernatural awakening. She needed their strength, their pain, their evolution. Chapter 3. The Orphan's Trail. Grace had no family, no roots, just a trail of places she'd passed through like a ghost. She sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by maps, creases worn deep from years of folding and unfolding. A globe spun slowly beside her, marked with pins and scribbled dates. She was trying to remember not just where she'd been, but who she'd been. The problem wasn't time travel, it was memory. She'd lived like a fugitive from normalcy. After leaving the convent at 17, she'd drifted from country to country, never staying longer than a few weeks. She'd slept in train stations, monasteries, strangers' apartments. She'd chased silence, chased chaos, chased the feeling of being anywhere but here. Now she needed precision. She opened her journal again. The entries were erratic, some poetic, some manic, some just lists of powers she'd discovered. She flipped to a page marked Kyoto, 2016. A sketch of a temple, a note, walked through fire, no burns, no fear. That Grace had been fearless, but also reckless. She turned to Prague, 2013, a hostel bunk bed, a scribbled line. Mind clouding works best when tired. Sleep deprivation equals amplification. That Grace had been desperate, experimenting, alone. She closed the journal and stared at the map. She began to draw a timeline, not just of locations, but of emotional states. Where had she been angry? Where had she been grieving? Where had she felt powerful? She needed 5 versions of herself. 5 points in time where her powers had evolved. 5 Graces who could be convinced to fight. But convincing them wouldn't be easy. Each Grace was a different woman. Some would resist, some would attack, some might not believe her at all. She'd have to prove herself, to herself. She'd have to reveal secrets only she could know. She'd have to confront her own pain, her own shame, her own evolution. She looked at the map again. Her finger hovered over Peru. 2020, Sacred Valley. That was where she'd first levitated a boulder. That Grace had been raw, untrained, but strong. She circled the location. 1 down, 4 to go. She whispered, "Let's see if I can still surprise myself." Outside, thunder cracked. The sky darkened. Grace smiled. Her powers were listening. She closed her eyes and reached inward, activating the power she'd buried. Time folded like origami. The air shimmered. Reality bent. She was going back. Chapter 4. The First Recruit. The Sacred Valley was quiet in the early morning, wrapped in mist and the scent of eucalyptus. Grace stood at the edge of a cliff, watching the sun rise over the Andes. It was exactly as she remembered, except this time she wasn't alone. She was watching herself. 25-year-old Grace sat cross-legged on a stone ledge, eyes closed, palms upturned. Her hair was longer than silver white, tangled from weeks of hiking. Her clothes were threadbare, her boots cracked. She looked like someone trying to disappear into the earth. Grace, the older one, approached slowly. She knew this version well. Raw, restless, still grieving the loss of a friend she'd met in Chile, still unsure if her powers were a gift or a curse. Younger Grace opened her eyes and stared. "Who are you?" she asked, voice low, guarded. "I'm you," said Grace. "From the future." Younger Grace didn't laugh, she didn't scoff. She simply stood, eyes narrowing. "Prove it." Grace took a breath. She knew what would work. "You buried a letter under the altar stone at the Temple of the Moon. You never told anyone. It said, 'I forgive you, even if you never asked.'" Younger Grace flinched. Her defenses cracked. "How do you know that?" "Because I wrote it." Silence stretched between them. The wind picked up, swirling dust around their boots. Grace stepped closer. "There's going to be an invasion," she said. "Aliens. 6 months from now. I saw it, and I can't stop it alone. Younger Grace crossed her arms. Why me? Because you're strong. Because you haven't learned to doubt yourself yet. Because you moved a boulder with your mind last week and thought it was an accident. That got her attention. I need you, Grace said. We need each other. Younger Grace looked out over the valley. Her jaw clenched. Her eyes shimmered, not with tears, but with something deeper. Recognition. Destiny. Fine, she said. But if this is a trick, I'll bury you under that boulder. Grace smiled. Fair enough. They stood together, two versions of the same soul, watching the sun rise. The air shimmered around them as Grace activated the time fold. The valley blurred. The cliff vanished. They were gone. Chapter 5. The Second Self. Berlin was steel and shadow in winter. The city buzzed with cold neon and quiet rage, its streets slick with rain and memory. Grace stood outside a crumbling apartment block in Kreuzberg, watching the second version of herself through a fogged window. This Grace was 23, leaner, sharper. Her hair was the same unnatural white, her eyes rimmed with sleeplessness. She was pacing, muttering to herself in 3 languages, fingers twitching with static. She had just discovered how to bend lightning, how to call storms with a whisper. She was dangerous. Grace entered the building, her boots echoing on the concrete stairs. She remembered this place. The mold in the corners, the smell of cigarettes and curry, the loneliness. She knocked once. No answer. She knocked again. The door flew open, and younger Grace stood there, one hand raised, crackling with electricity. "Who the hell are you?" "I'm you," said Grace. "From the future." Younger Grace didn't lower her hand. "Try again." Grace stepped forward slowly. "You still wear the ring from the man in Chile. You never talk about him. You think forgetting is strength." The lightning flickered. Her hand dropped. Grace continued. "You keep a journal in the freezer. You think it's safer there. You wrote, 'If I ever meet myself, I'll know it's real if she says the word Edelweiss.'" Younger Grace stared. Her mouth opened, then closed. "You're really me?" "Yes." She turned away, walking back into the apartment. Grace followed. The place was chaos, books stacked like barricades, wires snaking across the floor, a half-built device humming in the corner. "You came to recruit me," Younger Grace said. "Let me guess. Apocalypse?" "Aliens. 6 months. I saw it." Younger Grace laughed bitterly. "Of course you did." Grace stepped closer. "I need you. You're the one who learned how to weaponize storms. You're the one who figured out how to redirect rivers with your mind. You're the tactician." Younger Grace turned, eyes sharp. "And what do I get?" Grace hesitated. "A chance to matter. A chance to fight for something bigger than your grief." Silence. Then Younger. Grace walked to the window and stared out at the city. "Fine, but I'm not taking orders. I'm not your soldier." "You're not," Grace said. "You're me." They locked eyes. A storm rumbled in the distance, summoned by instinct. The time fold shimmered. Berlin blurred. 2 Graces vanished into the future. Chapter 6. The Third Mind. Mumbai was a symphony of contradictions, chaos and calm, incense and exhaust, ancient rituals unfolding beside neon signs. Grace stood in the courtyard of a crumbling ashram, watching her third self meditate beneath a banyan tree. This Grace was 21, barefoot, serene. Her eyes were closed, but her awareness radiated outward like heat. She wore a threadbare shawl and a necklace of river stones. Around her, the air shimmered faintly, an aura of power not yet named. Grace approached slowly, careful not to disturb the silence. "You're late," Younger Grace said without opening her eyes. Grace blinked. You knew I was coming. I felt you. You're me, but heavier. Grace sat beside her, cross-legged. Heavier? You carry more fear, more noise. Grace smiled. You're more perceptive than I remembered. I'm more quiet than you remembered. They sat in silence for a moment, the sounds of the city distant and irrelevant. Grace studied her younger self, the way she breathed, the way her fingers moved subtly in rhythm with the wind. This version had just discovered how to cloud minds, how to walk through fire without pain. She hadn't weaponized her powers yet. She saw them as extensions of spirit, not tools of war. I need you, Grace said. I know. There's going to be an invasion. Aliens. 6 months. Younger Grace opened her eyes. They were calm, unafraid. I saw it too, she said. Not the details, just the shadow. Grace exhaled. You're the first one who didn't fight me. I don't fight what I already understand. Grace hesitated. You're stronger than you think. Younger Grace smiled. We all are. They stood together. The banyan tree rustled above them, its roots tangled like timelines. Grace reached out, activating the time fold. The courtyard shimmered. The air bent. As they vanished, younger Grace whispered, Watch out, aliens. We are coming. Chapter 7. The Fourth Flame. Cairo burned with heat and history, the city baked beneath a sun that refused to relent, its streets alive with barter, prayer, and the scent of roasted spices. Grace stood in the ruins of an abandoned bathhouse near the edge of the city, watching flames dance across the tiled floor. Her fourth self was 20 years old, shirtless, barefoot, wild-eyed. She moved through fire like it was water, her skin untouched, her breath steady. She had just discovered her immunity, her ability to walk through infernos and emerge unscathed. She hadn't learned restraint. She didn't believe in it. Grace stepped into the bathhouse, the heat rising around her like a challenge. Younger Grace turned, flames licking her arms like pets. You're late. Grace raised an eyebrow. You expected me? Number. But I knew something was coming. The fire's been restless. Grace took a cautious step forward. I'm you, from the future. Younger Grace grinned. Prove it. Grace didn't hesitate. You burned your journal last week because it scared you. You wrote, I am not a weapon, and then set it on fire. The grin faded. You still dream about the convent, Grace continued. About Sister Miriam. You pretend you don't care, but you still hear her voice when you sleep. Younger Grace's jaw clenched. The flames around her flickered. You're really me. Yes. Younger Grace paced, her bare feet leaving scorched prints on the tile. So, what do you want? There's going to be an invasion. Aliens. 6 months. I saw it. Younger Grace snorted. Of course you did. I need you, Grace said. You're the one who taught me how to walk through destruction. You're the one who doesn't flinch. Younger Grace stopped pacing. And what do I get? Grace stepped into the fire. It curled around her legs, testing her. She didn't flinch. You get to burn the right things. Silence. Then, Younger. Grace smiled. Fine, but I'm not playing nice. I wouldn't ask you to. They stood together, flames swirling around them like a crown. Grace activated the time fold. The bathhouse shimmered. The fire roared. 2 Graces vanished into the future. Chapter 8. The Fifth Shadow. Alaska was silence incarnate. Snow stretched endlessly across the horizon, broken only by jagged pines and the occasional howl of wind. Grace stood outside a remote cabin, its windows frosted over, its chimney long dormant. This was where she had disappeared, literally and figuratively. Her fifth self was 19, pale, gaunt, wrapped in layers of wool and solitude. She had just discovered how to vanish, not just from sight, but from memory. She could cloud minds so thoroughly that even strangers forgot she'd ever existed. She had lived alone for months, surviving on canned food and the occasional hallucination. Grace approached the cabin slowly, her breath fogging in the air. She remembered this place, the cold that numbed thought, the journal entries that stopped mid-sentence, the way she had started to forget her own name. She knocked once. No answer. She knocked again. The door opened, but no one stood there. Grace stepped inside. The cabin was dim, lit only by the flicker of a dying lantern. She felt a presence behind her before she saw it. "You shouldn't be here," said a voice. Low, hollow. Grace turned. Her younger self stood in the corner, half visible, her outline flickering like static. "I'm you," Grace said. "From the future." Younger Grace didn't respond. She simply stared, eyes sunken, unreadable. "You keep your memories in a box under the floorboards," Grace said. "Photos, letters, a drawing of Sister Miriam with the words, 'I forgive you,' written in charcoal." Younger Grace flinched. "You once stayed invisible for 3 days straight," Grace continued. "You thought if no one saw you, you couldn't be hurt." Silence. Then younger Grace whispered, "I still think that." Grace stepped closer. "There's going to be an invasion. Aliens. 6 months. I saw it." Younger Grace didn't move. "I need you," Grace said. "You're the one who taught me how to disappear, how to move without being seen, how to survive when no one remembers you." Younger Grace looked down. Her voice cracked. "I don't want to be remembered." Grace reached out gently. "You don't have to be. You just have to help." The silence stretched. Then, slowly, younger Grace stepped forward. Her outline solidified. Her eyes met Grace's. "Fine," she said, "but I'm not staying." "You don't have to." They stood together, two shadows in the cold. Grace activated the timefold. The cabin shimmered. The snow howled. Two Graces vanished into the future. Chapter 9. The Gathering. The air in Grace's apartment was electric, literally. Storm clouds hovered just above the ceiling, flickering with contained lightning. The walls pulsed with heat, cold, and invisible pressure. Reality itself felt stretched, like it was trying to accommodate too many versions of the same soul. 6 Graces stood in a loose circle. None spoke. They were mirrors, distortions, echoes. Each one carried a different posture, a different scar, a different way of holding power. The room felt like a paradox, one woman multiplied across time, now converging in a single moment. Grace, the original, stood at the center. She looked at them, the raw one from Peru, eyes wide with wonder and strength. The Stormbringer from Berlin, arms crossed, lightning dancing across her knuckles. The mystic from Mumbai, serene and barefoot, her aura humming with quiet power. The firewalker from Cairo, restless, pacing, flames licking at her heels. The shadow from Alaska, half visible, half listening, her gaze unreadable. They were here, and they weren't. Grace cleared her throat. "We have 6 months." No one responded. She continued. "The aliens are coming, I saw it. Their ships, their weapons, their strategy. Earth won't survive unless we stop them first." The Berlin Grace scoffed. "And you think we can do that? Just the 6 of us?" "We're not just 6, said the Mumbai Grace softly. "We're one. Multiplied." The Cairo Grace cracked her knuckles. "I say we burn them before they land." The Alaska Grace faded slightly, her voice barely audible. "We should stay hidden. Let them come. Strike from the shadows." Grace raised a hand. "We'll train first, together. Learn what we can do when we combine." "Who made you boss?" asked Cairo Grace. Time, answered Grace. It was reason enough. She gestured toward the center of the room. A steel beam lay across two chairs, heavy, immovable. Let's start with telekinesis. The Peru. Grace stepped forward. Her fingers twitched. The beam shuddered. The Berlin Grace joined her. Lightning surged. The beam lifted an inch. Then the others stepped in. Fire, wind, silence, light. The beam rose slowly, then hovered, then spun. Together they could move mountains. They trained for hours. They redirected water from a nearby river, flooding the streets and then pulling it back. They summoned storms, then calmed them. They walked through fire, vanished into smoke, clouded the minds of passers-by until they forgot they'd ever seen them. They were learning, evolving, but they were also fracturing. Arguments sparked, old wounds reopened. The Berlin Grace accused the Cairo Grace of recklessness. The Alaska Grace refused to sleep. The Peru Grace cried in secret, overwhelmed by the weight of her future. Grace watched it all. She didn't intervene. She knew this was part of it. They weren't just training powers, they were learning to trust themselves, each other. By midnight, the apartment was silent again. The six Graces sat in a circle, exhausted, breathing in sync. Grace looked at them. Tomorrow we plan the assault. No one argued. They were becoming an army. Chapter 10. Resonance. Grace woke to silence. Not the absence of sound, but a silence so deep it felt like the world was holding its breath. She wasn't alone. The six of them had fallen asleep in the same room, scattered like debris after a storm. But something had changed overnight. The air was thicker. Time felt slower. Her skin buzzed. She sat up and saw it. A thread of light connected her chest to the others, faint, pulsing, like veins of energy. Each Grace had one. They glowed in different colors: blue, red, gold, violet, green, silver, and they converged at the center of the room, forming a knot of pure white. The Mumbai Grace stirred. You see it too? Grace nodded. What is it? Resonance, she said. We're sinking. The Berlin Grace groaned. Great. Now we're a hive mind. No, said the Alaska Grace, her voice distant. We're becoming something else. They gathered around the knot of light. As they approached, memories flickered, not their own, but each other's. Grace saw the Berlin Grace's first kiss under a thunderstorm. The Cairo Grace felt the Peru Grace's fear during her first power surge. The Mumbai Grace tasted the Alaska Grace's loneliness, cold and sharp. They were bleeding into each other. Grace stepped back. We need boundaries. But the knot burned brighter. It wasn't listening. Suddenly, the Peru Grace collapsed. Her body convulsed, eyes wide, mouth open. But no sound came out. The others rushed to her. She's resonating too fast, said the Mumbai Grace. Her mind can't hold it. Grace knelt beside her. What do we do? Anchor her, said the Alaska Grace. Share something real. Grace closed her eyes. She reached into the knot and offered a memory. Her mother's voice, singing in the kitchen, off-key but warm. The smell of cinnamon, the feeling of safety, the Peru. Grace gasped and stilled. The knot dimmed. They sat in silence again, shaken. We're not just powers, said the Cairo Grace. We're stories, and they're merging. The Berlin Grace stood. Then we need to control it, before it controls us. Grace nodded. We train again, but this time we train the resonance. That night they experimented. The Mumbai Grace taught them how to meditate together, syncing breath and thought. The Alaska Grace led them into dreams, where they built shared landscapes, mountains, rivers, memories. The Berlin Grace pushed their limits, triggering emotional spikes to test the knot's reactions. They discovered new abilities. Mimicry. One Grace could simulate another's power temporarily. Fusion. Two Graces could combine powers. Fire and wind became plasma. Light and shadow became invisibility. Projection. They could send thoughts across distances, even into other minds. But with each discovery came risk. The Peru Grace began speaking in riddles, fragments of other Graces' thoughts. The Cairo Grace lost control of her fire, burning through walls in her sleep. Grace herself began forgetting which memories were hers. They were becoming powerful, but unstable. At dawn, the Mumbai Grace whispered, "We're not just preparing for war. We're forging a weapon." Grace looked at the knot of light, now pulsing steadily in the center of the room. She wasn't sure if they were building something or being built. Chapter 11. The Crossing. The portal shimmered like a wound in space, raw, unstable, humming with frequencies Grace couldn't name. It had taken weeks to stabilize it, using the resonance knot as a power source. Now it pulsed like a heartbeat, waiting. Grace stood at the edge, the other five behind her. "No scouts," said the Berlin Grace. "No drones. We go in blind." The Alaska Grace nodded. "That's the only way they won't detect us." The Cairo Grace cracked her knuckles. "I say we hit hard and fast, find their command center, burn it down to the ground." The Mumbai Grace frowned. "We don't even know what they look like." Grace raised a hand. "We're not here to fight, not yet. We're here to learn." She stepped through. The alien planet felt wrong, not hostile, not barren, just wrong. The sky was a deep violet, streaked with gold clouds that moved against the wind. The ground pulsed beneath their feet, soft and warm, like living tissue. Trees grew in spirals, their leaves whispering in languages Grace almost understood. The Graces spread out, scanning. The Peru Grace touched a tree and gasped. "It's thinking." The Berlin Grace summoned lightning, but it fizzled. "The atmosphere's dampening us." The Alaska Grace vanished into shadow, then reappeared, shaken. "There's something watching." They moved cautiously. Structures rose in the distance, towers made of crystal and stone, glowing with internal light. No guards, no weapons, just silence. Grace led them inside. The interior was vast and hollow, like a cathedral built by memory. The walls shimmered, moving, shifting, alive. Chapter 12. The First Strike. The aliens arrived fast, sleek, insectoid, and eerily silent. They didn't speak. They didn't posture. They attacked. The Graces responded in kind. Cairo Grace ignited the air, turning oxygen into flame. Berlin Grace unleashed a storm, shorting out alien tech. Alaska Grace moved unseen, striking from behind. Peru Grace redirected the planet's magnetic flow, collapsing towers. Mumbai Grace clouded alien minds, sowing confusion. Grace herself amplified them all, her body a conduit for their combined power. The battle was brutal. The aliens adapted quickly, shifting tactics, deploying energy weapons that bent light and sound. But the Graces adapted faster. They fused powers instinctively. Fire and wind became plasma. Light and shadow became invisibility. Thought and motion became precognition. They moved as one. 6 bodies, 1 will. Battles raged across the planet. The 6 became 60. The 60 became 600. The aliens faltered. Grace reached the command nexus and tore it open with telekinesis. Inside, she found the fleet's control matrix, a living interface of thought and code. It reverberated with alien intent, a hive mind stretching across the stars. She didn't hesitate. She crushed it. All 6 Graces could hear it scream in their minds. Chapter 13. Last Grace Standing. The alien fleet began to collapse, falling from orbit, systems failing, communications severed. The planet trembled beneath their feet. The aliens retreated, disoriented and overwhelmed. Some fled into the towers, others simply vanished, their forms dissolving into mist. Grace stood in the center of the battlefield, surrounded by her other selves. They were bruised, burned, exhausted, but alive. "We did it," said Peru Grace, voice shaking. "No," Grace said. "We stopped this invasion. There may be more." Berlin Grace nodded. "Then we wait and watch." "And we give them a warning," Grace said, reaching for the hands of the other five. They formed a circle and broadcast into the minds of every living creature in the alien solar system. "Earth is ready. Earth is off limits." They returned to Earth through the portal, stepping into a world that had no idea how close it had come to extinction. The six Graces stood on a rooftop, watching the sunrise. The city below was quiet, unaware. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They were an army, and they were one. The end. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Also, please hit the bell icon for notifications. Thank you.